welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of John Carter, which I keep referring to as John Carpenter of Mars, because I'm thinking of The Ghost of Mars and I'm thinking of its title before some focus group got hold of it and changed it to just John Carter. So before I begin with my review, which, 2 years old, I appreciate that. It's on Netflix if you fancy watching it. So a big thank you to everyone who's been watching my Raid 2 review, which I admit is a lot more current, but that seems to be going gangbusters at the moment, so thank you very much for that. And please tell your friends about Rough Cut Film Review, because, I don't have the lavish budget of Total Film and the like, so it's purely word of mouth and this thing called the internet. So here we go. So anyway, let's move on. John Carter of Mars. So this is Andrew Stanton of Pixar fame, who's been given a vast sum of money to make what is essentially his dream project. It's based on a 100-year-old story by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and for better or worse, it feels like a sci-fi fantastic story, sort of a novella, but sadly since then we've had 100 years of progress in some ways. The first thing to mention really is, when watching this, I suspect a lot of people are going to think of this as a low-rent rip-off of Star Wars, which is fairly ironic because George Lucas freely admits that he's borrowed heavily from the canon here. So what we end up feels rather pillared, it feels out of date, it feels old-fashioned, and it is all of these things, unfortunately. So it's a $250 million folly, or is that pounds? Anyway, it's a lot of money that actually has some great actors around the periphery, but sadly Taylor Kirsch is the charisma vacuum at the centre of Mars, and he sinks this project like it was a battleship, because he was in Battleship. I think it was battleships plural, but anyway, the joke was great. Shut up. Actually, it's pretty easy to be mean to the pretty boy, but in fairness, it's very, very difficult to have the kind of charisma to pull off the leading man role, and that's why there aren't really that many of them. I'm thinking your Mel Gibsons, your Tom Cruises, well, Mel Gibson before his drunken antics, but I suppose they call it the X Factor, because chiseled jaw alone doesn't cut it, which this chap has. Taylor Kitsch, I can't pronounce it. Taylor Kitsch. He has the chiseled jaw, but there's something that Ryan Gosling seems to do completely effortlessly and without trying, although I very much doubt that. It's not something, unfortunately, that can be copied. It's that star quality, or whatever you want to call it. Plot-wise, John Carter. Well, it's simple, but at the same time really rather confusing as well, which, if you've listened to my reviews previously, you'll know I really, really like. And that's probably the only thing that this film has got in common with Serve Nazis Must Die, is the fact that the plots are simple and yet they're impenetrable. Basically, our hero is really sad and upset at the things he has had to do. He's disenfranchised. He was in the Civil War, fighting on the losing side, should we say, and as a consequence he sort of gets drunk and fiddles around the place a bit. While having a bit of a dust-up, he suddenly sort of comes upon a cave thing, which has obviously got a magic gateway to Mars in it. Now, much like the works of Lovecraft, someone of that nature, I love mentioning Lovecraft, as you know, if you were to try and film, for example, The Mountains of Madness after The Thing, which I reviewed recently, watch my review of that, that's fantastic. You definitely shouldn't miss out on that. It's difficult to go back to these source materials after they've been pillaged, because they often seem more simplistic and less interesting, and it does seem terribly unfair, but I'm afraid that's life. So our character gets sucked to Mars, transported to Mars, and whoa, he's on Mars, look at him go, and he can breathe fine, but there's lower atmosphere. Now, 100 years ago, I imagine the prospect of reading something where, wow, he goes to Mars, that's incredible, but tragically, in whatever year it is that we are currently in, we can watch characters getting sucked into hell and not be interested in the slightest. So, unfortunately, we are very cynical these days, and the prospect of someone going, oh, look at me, I'm on Mars, oh wow, look at I can jump, isn't really that tremendously interesting, and particularly when it's done in a really plodding way. So what we have here is really a tedious and poorly imagined war between good and evil and some nefarious non-human-y sort of things, I think they are. So we've got CGI aliens as well, that's sort of everything we hated from the modern Star Wars trilogy. It's got all the elements of a rip-roaring adventure, a sci-fi adventure. As clearly the source material really did set the template, or help set the template for this kind of shenanigans. But I got left with wondering who Stanton thought this film was going to appeal to. I think it's unfair in a certain sense that this was such a disaster financially, it lost so much money, whereas Avatar did so well and made an absolute killing, because the films are very similar. But that's more of a swipe at the low quality of Avatar than it is praise at the quality here. There really isn't anything in here that I can see would appeal to pretty much anyone. No matter what you're looking for in this film, you can find better examples of it elsewhere. It's fantastical, but it's also really boring. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.